Hello, hello.
Hello.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Today, of course, we're going to be speaking to Jane Clare Jones about the census, which I have seen her do a kind of potted version of the policy capture that's gone on, or the institutional capture that's gone on at the ONS. But we'll be asking her to speak about that here and the importance of sex-based data collection. Sounds very exciting, but I promise you, it will be. It will be.
I mean, I can't believe that we even have to actually try and explain what the importance of sex-specific data collection is. But, you know, we already have to explain why we need single-sex spaces and single-sex sports. So why would this be any different?
I guess. I haven't heard any compliments yet for my transition.
Well, I think the question is, did you get results? I mean, that's the proof of the pudding.
Only from people who look like me, and that is not why I joined. You know, I joined to meet women, not trans-identified men like myself, and there are just simply too many of them on the website. No, it's been very funny, and what's been great has been seeing the trans rights activists absolutely lose their shit over it. And I was thinking,
yes, it's interesting. Yes, I mean, I think, you know.
Oh, I should explain. So people might not understand. Sorry, Helen. But what I did was I created a profile on the lesbian dating app Her, which they've recently changed to the queer dating app to explain why there's so many men on it. And I got in, and I look exactly the same as all these men who are joining it, and TRAs are losing their shit because it proves exactly what we've been saying all along, which is that self-ID will lead to people taking the piss. In fact, in Ireland, there was a brilliant thing happened recently where a guy entered a women's sports race and won, and looked like me, just except much younger, much younger, and he just won. And there's a picture of him with the medal and everything. It's great. Sorry, Helen, what were you going to say?
Well, I was going to say that I think there was a funny element to it because you're a comedy writer, but there was a serious element to it as well. I mean, you're making a proper serious point.
And, well, yeah, I mean, it's so obvious.
And I think the tweet that I think the person who wrote it, the Metro article, tweeted out saying, like, Glyna, a cis man, has invaded a women's-only space in an effort to prove how trans rights will lead to cis men invading women's-only space. And I think you proved it beautifully.
Yeah, I mean, it was already happening. Yeah,
yes, exactly.
But, I mean, this is the point, isn't it? Yes. Yeah, I mean, there are 2 points to this because it isn't just about cis men. That's as well as, but even, just the ones who actually say that they're trans. It's also invading a women's only space, isn't it? But on top of that, cis men invading, you've just proven how easy it is. I mean, yes, you have proven that point.
Yeah. I'll tell you a site I wouldn't be able to get onto. Giggle. I wouldn't be able to get onto Giggle because Giggle has facial recognition software that stops men from joining. So if you are a lesbian, a real lesbian, and you want to meet other real lesbians, Giggle is the thing to join. And I'm not just saying that because I bought a share. I bought a share in Giggle, which I'm very proud of. I thought I would put.
Just one.
I just won because I don't know. I didn't want to. 2 would cost far too much money for me, but I'd never bought shares before, so I thought I'll buy one and put my money where my mouth is.
Wow, you're a tech investor now. A tech investor.
I mean, what did we used to call them back in the 80s? Big swinging dicks.
Oh right, yeah, that's me.
But with
your one share in a women's only app. Excellent.
That's right. But you would be able to get onto straight dating apps and claim to be a woman, but any man could filter you out. They have the right to say, no, I don't want males. And that was exemplified beautifully this week when a woman posted a graphic, a sort of fake graphic that had a picture of a crying girl, and it said, it's so 98% of men won't have sex with trans women because they're bigots, right? And this poor crying girl, and she shared it ironically, and she even wrote in the thing like 98% of men won't sleep with trans women because they're straight. And men had a field day. Men went crazy. We're like, of course, how dare anyone suggest that I sleep with a trans woman? I don't do dick. This is my right. And it was like, none of them got banned by Twitter. Yeah, she did though.
Really?
Yeah, she got a suspension, and she was forced to take the tweet down. So if you say women must fuck me even though I have a dick, Twitter loves you and bans anyone who disagrees. If you say men must fuck me even though I have a dick, Twitter bans you and agrees with the men.
Yeah. It's incredible.
Well, this is not a surprise.
Did you see there was a, by the way, just to say, Jane is in the studio. We'll be having her in one second. Okay. Hello, Jane. We will bring you in one moment. Just talking about me for a few minutes.
But there was one more thing I wanted to talk about you. So you finish first. What were you going to say?
Well, I was going to move on a little bit to that amazing panel, which is called 50-50, representation for women in politics. And it's like a third men. There's two people on it who are trans-identified males. So a thing called 50-50 about increasing the representation of women is not even 100% women. And the amazing thing about it is, if you look at the thread where they posted the ad for the panel or whatever it was, underneath you can see dozens of deleted tweets, or this account does not exist, this account does not exist, because they were all asking questions like, will there be, or do you mean natal women, or do you mean, what do you mean? And they were all just banned. So it's the most incredible skeletal looking thread where there's just so many people who've been banned. Anyway, that's
astonishing, even for Twitter.
Yeah. It's pretty amazing.
I wanted to make another thing. You seem to have been prolific this week, Graham. You're everywhere. You put that lovely thread together. You and Eddie Izzard. With your how to be an excellent pair of trans women, I think it was it?
Male lesbians. Yes.
And I read it. And I read it, and actually your 10 points I thought were so reasonable. I actually can't think why Eddie Izzard wouldn't put his name to these points. Like the first one, we are not automatically entitled to female spaces because we wear women's clothing. Single-sex spaces exist for a reason, safeguarding of women, etc. Number two, we will not take advantage of any measures to address the gender imbalance in politics. It's, taking advantage, and it goes down. And I think these are actually completely reasonable points. And I actually am now going to publicly call on Eddie Izzard to say, yes, Graham, I will actually stand with you on this. I will help you with this campaign. Because I actually think this is right. And honestly, if you did all of these, I think the whole problem would be solved.
Yeah.
Literally.
And it's only fair if they want us to accommodate they can't feel sexually aroused, they can't feel romantically whole unless they imagine that they're women, and they want us to accommodate that so they can feel better. Well, they could return the favor by saying, we'll return the favor by respecting women's rights, the very least.
And also, Eddie has a responsibility to people now that he's come out as trans. He did one good thing. He said that J.K. Rowling wasn't transphobic, which is obvious to anyone who has a brain. But he needs to go further, and he needs to object to the colonization of female spaces, the erasure of female language. He needs to object, like, for instance, a domestic violence shelter recently got defunded of about 5 million because it didn't cater for men or trans-identified males, people like me and Eddie. It didn't cater for us enough. Eddie should come out and say, this is wrong. These women are vulnerable and they need help, and they can't have a vital service like that being closed down. Because Eddie, I hope you're watching this, because women will die because of that, and men need to stand up for women. That's a basic thing that men are supposed to do.
If only we were still on Twitter so that we could actually get hold of Eddie Izzard. But I'm not even allowed. I'm not even allowed to read Twitter. I'm not allowed to read. I am not allowed to read about UK politics on the foremost platform, which is the virtual public square, for the rest of my life.
The rest of your life, because you asked a question about female safeguarding. It's absolutely extraordinary. But let me say something, though. The story isn't over, because we have something up our sleeve. It's top secret, but you will find out about it within the next month. And it's going to be very exciting. I better bring Jane in, because I feel so guilty at her waiting.
Well, Abby would like to talk to her.
Yes, and we would love to talk to her. Hello, Jane. How are you doing?
I'm good. Hello.
Jane.
Hello. Hello.
How excellent to see you.
Lovely to see you. Always great.
I'm kind of shocked by the story that you were telling about the reverse situation with the story that Artie was just telling. I didn't know that. I mean, I'm not surprised.
Isn't that shocking? Yeah.
I'm not surprised.
So
but
yeah.
How do they stop you reading Twitter, Helen?
I'm not allowed a Twitter account because I've been banned.
I know, but you can read it if you're not logged in.
Yes.
Oh,
yes,
but I'm not allowed like scary.
No, but I'm not allowed an account. So I'm,
I know, and it's an outrage.
It is outrage.
Well, they might actually stop you even using it on your computer. You never know. They're trying to stop people using Zoom. Are they going to stop people using telephones now? Are they going to say, I'm sorry, you must not use our telephone because of your political views? I mean, can you believe that? Did you hear about that, Jane? Posey Parker?
I did hear about it, and I do not think that media platforms should be censoring people's speech.
Yeah. No, because especially when it's American, especially when it's American countries doing it to UK women who are fighting to defend their rights in the UK. You know, it's extraordinary. Yeah. Same thing happened with Google. Jane, you reminded me of this the other day. Google putting their thumb on the scales by asking people to write to.
I think it was gendered. I think it was at the end of what I now refer to as the Battle of J.K. Rowling.
Right.
Yes. Which was a pretty intense bit of engagement last summer. That kind of culminated, or went through that whole thing where loads of people were coming out and being like, "You're weaponizing your trauma," and while the same, or at least an alliance of the same people were telling us all to choke on their dicks, and then at the end of that was getting towards the time when the GRA announcement was going to be made. And I think it was gendered intelligence. Had one of those kind of. It was to auto-generate some kind of letter to write to, I think, directly to Boris Johnson, and it was on their website, and you could go there and it would generate a letter, and it was like, explain to the Prime Minister why we need this legal reform, blah blah blah, and Google were promoting it on Twitter.
yeah,
and we were all just like, why is Google intervening in UK legislative politics? What is happening?
Well, it is though, isn't it? I mean,
and something people might not realise is that the Women's Equality Party received hundreds of thousands of pounds from a Google employee who has a trans-identified daughter. So what is going on there? I really, I wrote a number of things about this last year, and of course, all ignored, but I really hope that more questions are asked about how much influence he has on the direction of what is supposed to be a party for women.
Yes, and WEP have not been acquitting themselves very well. No. Let's just say they're not covered in glory on this issue.
No, that's true.
Lord Hunt is covered in a great deal more glory than the Women's Equality Party currently.
Oh, certainly. Yes. Lord Hunt and Baroness Nicholson.
Nicholson, yes.
What a wonderful speech. Her Shakespeare, it was the whole thing was quite something, actually. Yeah, I think we all felt quite like, oh my God, people are actually saying true things in our parliament. Yeah. And I do want to move on to the census in a second, but I just want to talk a little bit more, just very quickly, about the kind of, I don't know what you would call it, a cone of silence or something around this subject. Like, I've had two experiences of that this week. Three experiences. Pink News, Metro, and Her in Ireland all covered my stunt with the dating app. And they all pretended that they couldn't see the point that I was making. They said he allegedly harassed trans women. The link that I shared is not secret. It's a public thing that you can view. So these journalists wrote whole things about it and just left out the information that I was actually protesting about men being on these dating apps, you know.
It's
and
like
also
thing with
Michael Cashman, responding to the debate in the Lords. He says he calls it anti-trans or something. And again, hundreds of women telling Lord Adonis, another thing.
Yeah.
I'm mystified.
I'm completely mystified. What are they possibly talking about?
Yeah.
These hysterical women.
Hundreds of replies telling him exactly what the problem is. And the only person he responds to is Lord Hunt. You know, these people are so disingenuous. And it is one of those maddening things that no one will talk to you honestly about the problems. No one will engage, you know. But
and I think that's why what Lord Hunt said in his speech was so important, because he basically pointed at it directly and said people are scared and they won't speak up. They know what's happening. There's a lot of people in this house that know what is happening.
Yes.
And they're too frightened.
Yes,
you know?
that was powerful.
That was really important, I think, because, you know, and it's the same thing happening in academia now. I mean, like, put aside the question of whether we want to actually welcome the state intervening in speech in universities. And I obviously have extreme concerns about that, and especially given it's a right-wing government, and they have also, you know, they also want to to criminalize people criticizing capitalism. So I mean, not that I'm applying for a job in a university anytime soon, but if I was, not being able to critique capitalism would pretty much, like, you know, blast a hole through my inability to do my work. So I'm not happy about that necessarily, and I think it's, you know, not the way that we would necessarily want to have this dealt with, right? But at the same time, there is a really serious problem. Universities will not regulate themselves on this issue, and tons of academics are just coming out and just being like, there's no problem. This is a completely manufactured crisis, you know, and several of those people, you know, women are going up to them and being like, no, actually it's not, and our speech rights are being quite seriously violated here. And then they're just, you know, they're just like, what did like, someone say? Someone say something?
Or even worse, well, you're talking to me now, so you're not silenced.
Let's do that.
Disingenuousness.
I mean, that, right? Exactly. The only full evidence of women being silenced would have been if we actually never heard them fucking say anything at all. It's like the fact that I didn't manage to completely silence you is evidence of the fact that no one has tried to silence you.
That's right.
It's like saying, well, no one could have attempted to murder you because you're not dead. I mean, it's absurd.
It is absurd.
But
and everyone knows it's a lie. Everyone is aware that it's a lie. They must do. And if they aren't aware that it's a lie, they really need to be quiet about it, because they're not helping the debate one little bit, and they're showing their ignorance. They're showing that they're either lying or stupid.
There's also something that's going on with the fact that it seems to me, I really wonder, and I've wondered this for a long time, how much academics inside the university, obviously, who are engaging in the more kind of academic level trans theory actually have a fucking clue about what the trans rights movement is actually doing and what it is actually about. Like all of the stuff about this appendix that I wrote, which is kind of hilarious. I wrote the census report 5 months ago. It was published 4 or 5 months ago. No one noticed it. They only noticed it recently because the census issue has got more traction now. And now they're suddenly noticing it. And they're just going, oh, well, this history is completely made up and we've never heard of this person. Because I talk a lot about Whittle and Rothblatt, right? And their role in the development of trans ideology. And they're like, oh, we don't know anything about this. This, you know, it's not Judith Butler. And we're just like, yes, weirdly, the policy of the Scottish Prison Service did not arise just, you know, ex nihilo from Judith Butler. Like there's a whole there's a whole political movement out here, and I'm not even fucking sure if you know what the political movement you're standing for says, what its policy objectives are, what its history is, like, and then, you know, and it's at the moment everyone's walking around being like, are they lying? Are they, are they stupid? Are they willfully ignorant? Like,
I used to think the same.
What's going on here?
It's a movie that's dominated by rich, straight, white males who are very, very powerful. And everybody's convinced that it's really these special, vulnerable people with accidental body swappings. Like it's all, you know, the movie
and
Big
the,
or Parent
and the
Trap
thing
or
is,
something.
you know, that there are vulnerable trans people out in the world. They're not the trans rights movement. Like the trans rights movement is a whole nother thing. And there just needs to be some clarity about what we're talking about, right? Because they can go, oh, it's a conspiracy theory. I don't think it's a conspiracy theory any more than I think patriarchy is a conspiracy theory, or I think capitalism is a conspiracy theory. What I do think is that groups of people with certain sets of interests end up doing things together politically. That's how politics works. I don't think they all sit in a room with like stroking cats. It's like a big But people have shared ideas, and then those shared ideas are moved into policy, and you need some explanation how, you know, seemingly 95% of the institutions in the English-speaking world have, within the space of about 5 years, come to the conclusion that humans are not sexed, right? Yeah. Because that doesn't just happen by accident.
No,
you know, and it also doesn't happen because Judith Butler wrote Gender Trouble in 1990. Like, you need some other explanation.
Even Judith Butler,
hard, is it?
Even Judith Butler. Sorry, Helen. But
it's not hard. It's not hard to work this out. I mean, it really isn't. You know, it's obvious that something's happened, and we've seen it. We've seen it happen. Anyone who has come along latterly, and you know, again, it's the same thing. If they haven't seen it happen, then they're not experienced enough to talk about it. And if they have seen it happening and they're pretending that it hasn't, then they're lying. So it's one or the other.
Right. Even Judith Butler doesn't seem aware of what's going on.
Judith Butler hasn't got a fucking clue what is going on.
She's got
no idea. And whenever she's asked to talk about it, she claims that it's all to do with like gender ideology in the Catholic Church. and it's all just like, you actually haven't got a clue what is happening.
And Colm O'Gorman as well in Amnesty Ireland. I mean, he doesn't know the first thing about it. A lot of people. One thing that's very depressing about it. I'm not sure if this is as true about Judith Butler as it is about Colm O'Gorman, but it just shows how little men consider women in anything. They just don't see their interests as important.
I mean, I would say that's almost as true for Judith Butler. Judith Butler has less than zero interest in the specific interests of women. I mean, she actually says it in the beginning, in the introduction to Gender Trouble. Basically, there's this amazing bit in the introduction to Gender Trouble where she does this like little recitation of essentially Beauvoir's argument about the oppression of women, and says, you know, men don't like, you know, men have these big invulnerability kind of complexes and ideas about their omniscience and whatever, and they don't like the fact that they're actually dependent on women, and that's what generates this mechanism. That's a paraphrase, a very rough paraphrase. I can't remember exactly what it is, but she points directly at that mechanism about men feeling resentful about being dependent on women, right? And then the next line is literally, but that couldn't hold my interest. and I'm like, that's the fundamental structure of patriarchy. You've basically just gone, I read Beauvoir and I learned about the structure of patriarchy, and then I decided I didn't give a fuck. But I am now going to go on and be the allegedly most respected feminist in the world, despite the fact that 30 years ago I made it very, very clear that I do not give a crap about the oppression of women.
Yes, and I'm just she's been very handy. She's been very handy for the chat.
They love that, and then everyone's like, oh, why is she so elevated? And I'm like, because there's nothing patriarchy likes more than anti-feminist feminism.
Absolutely.
Like when you see the abandon with which men have thrown themselves into a kind of pornographic reality. I mean, the website Her, those men are, you know, trying to attract a mate, so they're wearing clothes and stuff. But when you see some of the things that men are doing at the moment, the fake breasts, I saw a guy today doing the head tilt, and wearing like full lingerie, and he looks like, I don't know, he looks like someone you'd see on Vic and Bob's old show. He just looks like a bloke who's kind of wandered in, and it's like the pornography has done such a number on these young men. They're not in any way dysphoric.
And on young women.
And on young women,
well.
excuse me. Yeah. But I do think, though, that sometimes I totally agree. And I think that when you see these images of women with double mastectomies, these young girls with double mastectomies, you can see what effect porn has had on them. It's obviously running away from porn that they're doing. But what young men are doing, they're escaping into porn, and it's a really depressing phenomenon. And I worry about,
yeah.
I also think, I mean, this is interesting if you think about like what happened during the sex wars, right? Because the sex wars happened really at the beginning of this kind of liberalization of pornography, and we can talk about the way in which the anti-pornography side framed their arguments, and I could make some criticisms of it, and the way that it kind of fed into a. I think it's why it's important now that we make, I mean, I've said this before, I think it's why it's important now we don't make our arguments in highly moralistic language, because it alienates people, because the major issue is that this is a harm. It's a harm to women and it's a harm to men, actually, because it fucks their sex drives up, right? And then you get to a point, I mean, you hear horrifying stories now, and, a third of women are being non-consensually choked.
And spat on and slapped.
And spat on and slapped because the men just think that's what sex is. Right? And we hear anecdotal stories about girls turning up at doctors' surgeries with injuries that they've incurred from the type of sex they're having when they're like 16, 17.
Yeah.
That's horrifying. I've heard stories about girls saying that it's quite normal now to have a male partner who can't have sex without having porn on their phone.
Yeah.
Because they can't get around. Yes.
Absolutely.
There were 16, 17, 18-year-old girls having sex with boys, with young men who cannot get it up unless they've got a phone with porn in their hand. So they're fucking their girlfriends with it.
That's obviously such a problem at such a young age. That's
it's really common with young men now.
Sex lives.
Gay men too. They're going to look at porn while they're having sex with men. It's just, but the thing with porn, people are being encouraged to indulge their sexual desires so much that there's nothing wrong with just going all in on whatever your sexual urges are, to the point where, you're just being hyper desensitized. But the transition, picture like imagining, I always like, this is metaphor I have in my mind of like, imagine you have a problem where you're obsessed with someone sexually and you want to have sex with them and they don't want to sleep with you back. You can either go to a therapist and say, okay, I can't stop trying to sleep with someone who doesn't want to sleep with me, or you could just keep trying to pressure that person into sleeping with you. And that's sort of like transition. I need to make everybody pretend that I'm a woman because I have this compulsion to fantasize that I'm a woman. Or I need to go to a therapist and deal with this compulsion in a more realistic way. And it used to be most people did the former. Most people, it was only people who just completely could not, like autogynephiles, who really just could not function without the romantic and sexual satisfaction they got out of imagining themselves as women and, adopting that role full time. That was a very rare thing. But now it's like anybody who finds it hot to imagine themselves as a woman, they just barrel right in there. And they're like, I have the right to indulge the sexuality,
This is the thing.
Yes, I have a right.
This is the part of it that comes, this whole thing is a melange of various different strands that have come from different places. And trans ideology is actually only one of the strands, right? Because then you have bits of liberal feminism and then you have queer theory, and then they all now you just have this kind of confluence. And that thing comes, I do believe it comes from queer theory, because as soon as you start saying there must be no normativity around sexual practices, right, you're basically, and obviously that's an extrapolation from the argument about gay rights. So fair enough. we pathologized this particular form of sexuality, and it was a mistake for us to have pathologized it. That doesn't mean, therefore, that there must be no pathologization or limits placed around any other forms of sexuality. And there's no account of harm, right?
Yeah.
Like the reason why there should be no pathologization around homosexuality is because homosexuality is not a harm.
It's harmless, yeah.
It's and preventing people from engaging in homosexuality when they're homosexual is a harm. So don't do that, right? Yeah. And obviously it was a patriarchal adjunct, right? Because it's about maintaining gender roles. Exactly. So fine, get rid of that. But all normativity around sexuality is therefore bad, is the wrong conclusion.
Yeah. And we already had to go through this in the 70s and 80s. In the
and then we already
we had to realize that consent and age of consent, you had to be an adult and you had to be a consenting adult. And it wasn't all sex is good. It was consenting adult sex is good. And now we're doing this all over again with the new gender liberation. It's about eroding boundaries. Instead of saying it's okay for some people to whatever, want to sleep with people of the same sex who dress the opposite sex or whatever. It was saying that like everybody has to just pretend they can't see sex at all. Again, it's just taking it too broadly.
Right. Yeah. And what you say about the boundary thing, I mean, is so fundamental to the structure of patriarchy, right? Because patriarchy is all about essentially women or people who are positioned as the people who meet the needs of males not being allowed to have boundaries. It's a relationship between service and entitlement, basically. And what is happening now is that we have a rights movement that is actually, I mean, like we keep saying, it's a male sexual rights movement. That's what it is. That's what's going on. This is male sexual rights politics. And that example that you gave, Artie, is a perfect demonstration of that. Because no one's going to fuck with men's sexual boundaries. Right, it's the boundaries of the people whose job it is to meet men's needs who are going to get fucked with, like that's a new thing. You know, and that's what's also so horrifying. To come back to the battle of J.K. Rowling when they start being like, you're weaponizing your trauma, because I'm like, well, it would really help if you weren't like reproducing the precise psychic structure of rape culture on us. Right.
Yep.
Which is no, and then like, okay, well, you said no. Well, we're going to beat the thing down with a bat, right? We're like, oh, okay. Probably not the best way of convincing us that our anxieties were unfounded.
I thought that I put together a document because I didn't want the tweets to get lost. I put together a document just from about November and December of the sort of harassment I was getting from people on Twitter, and most of it, like by far the majority of it, is people saying to me, oh my god, you're so obsessed with penis. So here you've got a woman saying, I don't want to see your penis, and men saying, oh my god, you so want to see my penis, you're so obsessed with it. And that is the foundation of rape culture, isn't it? It's like, I know you've said you don't want it, but here it is anyway, and I'm going to now say, oh, she really wanted it. Actually, she wants it. And I saw it again and again and again, and I thought, that's it. That's exactly what it is.
I mean, that's the bottom line of this whole thing, right? Thou shalt not say no to dick. And
I'm going to write that down.
It was also my father Richard's catchphrase.
I think Gia Milonovich, back in like 2012, 2013, when we first ran into this, Gia Milonovich formulated the hashtag no unexpected penis. And I was so that's a good way of no surprise penis, please.
Yes,
exactly.
And you know, and it's also extremely, like in that last interview that Butler did in the New Statesman, where she was basically like saying, you know, these women all have like penis phobia, and actually she said a fantasy. They have a fantasy about like this threatening penis, and we're like, it's not a fantasy.
It's not a fantasy.
What an asshole.
We're not. No. What an asshole. Basically, what you're basically doing is calling women's well-substantiated fear of male violence like hysteria, and and we're supposed to take you seriously as a feminist. And also, look, right, it wasn't us who decided to structure this entire culture around the fucking omnipotence of bloody penises, right? It wasn't us who decided It wasn't us who decided to build shit tons of towers and to compare our penises to guns and to swords and to name your vaginas sheaths and do all of this stuff, right? So we're going to construct this like profoundly, intensely like phallocentric culture. And then suddenly at the point at which we decide that we want our penises to, to not be, for you to not to pretend they're not penises anymore, then we're going to enact precisely the same bullying phallic logic on you about you demanding that you pretend our penises aren't penises, all in the service of our penises being allowed to go exactly where our penises want to go, because the only rule is our penises must go wherever we want them to.
And it's just, Jada said penis more than me. I'm so happy.
I mean, like, how fucking dare you? Like, how fucking dare you use these damn things as a weapon of fucking terror and war against us for 5,000 fucking years, and then turn around and be like, no, you're the crazy, obsessed fantasist.
Yes.
And we'll be like, I tell you what, guys, maybe you could deal with the fucking rape crisis and the amount of sexual abuse of children. And then when you've done that, come back to us and we'll have a conversation about your penises. But not right now. You need to go and get your people in order.
Can I say, even if we do sort out those things, I really don't want to talk about my penis. But thank you for the offer.
Yes, and we are more than grateful for that.
Yes,
anyway, I'm supposed to be talking about the census. How am I talking about?
We have 20 minutes left. 24 minutes left.
Okay, the first thing I want to do is I want to show you. This is the, you see, as you can see, Michael Cashman was right. It's very expensive. We encrusted it. We encrusted it in real gold flake, and that's where we used all the money for Oxford University from. I didn't have like stick-on rhinestones, which I think I'm actually going to buy some. I'm going to stick them on, and I'm going to send this to him.
You absolutely should.
Well, let's explain that, Michael. This is a PDF that Jane wrote.
No, it's a real thing.
Oh yeah, no, I know, but it's also a PDF. It's a real thing,
a PDF.
And the thing you've sent out to people to explain a couple of things, and maybe we should take them in order. I think the three headlines are the capture of the ONS, the ideological capture of the Office of National Statistics,
the Office for National Statistics,
the importance of sex-based data, and what we can do to protest what's happening now, which is that let's explain what's happening now with the ONS. Why is the next census such a problem, Jane?
Okay, so people get confused about this, and the TRAs are obviously deliberately misrepresenting what we're concerned about, because that's what they do, because they're not capable of faithfully representing a single thing we say ever about anything. But so the ONS, and actually the National Records of Scotland as well, the Scottish Census Authority, decided to introduce a gender identity question into the 2021 census, right? And that actually came down from central government, because central government conducted an equalities review at the end of the last decade, well, actually the decade before now, in the late noughties, and was like, we don't have enough good information on the trans population, and also we don't have enough good information on gay and lesbians and bisexual people, on the sexual orientation, people who have a different sexual orientation. So they decided, for equalities monitoring purposes, they wanted to gather that data, which is a very good idea, and we're not objecting to that. Mm-hmm. However, what happened in the course, ONS and NRS were like, okay, so we need to consult with trans stakeholders to work out how to develop this question, which seems like a sensible idea, and I'm not objecting to them doing that in principle. But of course, as soon as the trans stakeholders come in, what they get is a shit ton of trans ideology. Mm-hmm. And they also do focus groups and various testing with trans participants who can't cope with the sex question, essentially.
Right. Yeah.
Because they want to pretend they don't have sex. So when they're confronted with the sex question, they find it very difficult to deal with. Mm-hmm. Now, when ONS originally did their testing on this in the late noughties, they noticed this phenomenon, and they kind of went, actually, it seems like this population is quite difficult to measure, because also a lot of them don't want to reveal their trans status. One of the issues is that I mean, ontologically, like the philosophically, what is happening is you've got a population and the census authorities are trying to measure that population. And it's a very good idea to measure that population. But that population actually doesn't want to be recognized as trans.
Yeah.
They want to be recognized as the sex they identify as.
Yeah, that's the problem.
So that's the fundamental problem. So when ONS and NRS first confronted this, they were like, we're not sure we can measure this population because this population doesn't want to be measured as this population, right? And then they were like, okay, we won't measure them then. Maybe this isn't the most appropriate way of getting data on them. But that was what they concluded in the late noughties. When they went back to it in 2015, 2016, they were like, they did a consultation and a lot of people were like, we want a gender identity question. So they were like, okay, we'll go back to this and we'll have a look at it again. And then they were like, okay, well, we still believe that our conclusion about not being able to measure this population is valid. But anyway, we're going to go ahead and try and measure this population. And in the course of doing that, what happens is you get a lot of weird distortions going on around the sex question. And it turns out, and we didn't understand this originally. So this only really first came to our attention, particularly when a non-binary sex question was introduced to the Scottish Parliament in 2018. That's when we first realised there was a problem. We had no idea, because even though women are the stakeholders in the sex question, the census authorities never, ever recognised that women are stakeholders in the sex question, and they never consulted us. So we had no idea. The first real, Judith Green noticed something in 2017, but to do with ONS mooting the idea of removing the sex question or making it non-mandatory, and everyone was like, hang on a minute, what? You can't do that. But they were going to do that because it upset trans participants. And they were basically like going, they had workshops and the trans participants are like going, can we just replace the sex question with the gender question, please?
Wow.
And then ONS are basically like, they test a bunch of questions and they're like, well, I think we need to, they said, even not regarding data requirements, like, we're like, you're the census authorities, like, you should never begin a sentence not regarding data, irrespective of data needs, like, okay. They were like, irrespective of data needs, maybe we should make the sex question non-mandatory or remove it or replace it with a gender identity question. And that then got leaked and picked up. That was in 2017. And then in 2018, NRS essentially presented a non-binary sex question to the Scottish Parliament. It was done slightly under the table. And that was when we noticed something was wrong. And we only really noticed because it happened to fall on Joan McAlpine's committee desk, and Joan McAlpine is an actual feminist. And went, hang on a minute. She basically, set up a call for evidence. That was the first time that really came to our attention. And that's when we realised, in the course of the discussions around this question in Scotland, that's when we realised that ONS and NRS had introduced guidance in 2011 telling trans people that they could answer the sex question on the basis of their gender identity.
Right.
And we had no idea about that, because there was no formal process and no public consultation or anything about it. Essentially.
So can I ask, is this already in place? I mean, is the data already corrupted?
The data for the 2011 census was already corrupted.
Wow.
We have no idea how corrupted, because NRS and ONS never acknowledged that they'd corrupted the data. And in a committee meeting in the Scottish Parliament, I think in 2019, because when that came to light, the Scottish Parliament basically were like, no, you can't have a non-binary sex question because that's a gender identity. So that got moved off the table. But the problem is that the guidance is not under parliamentary control. The census questions themselves are under parliamentary control. And if you want to make a change to the body of the census questions, a bill has to go through. But the guidance is not under parliamentary control.
And the guidance is the problem.
I see.
Well, the guidance is the problem, because the guidance basically converts the sex question into a gender identity question. And this is actually, it's interesting how the two different census authorities deal with this. ONS never acknowledged this whatsoever. all the documents to do with their gender identity. I mean, there's all kinds of fucking around with the sex question and the conceptualization of the relationship between the sex and the gender identity question, but they never acknowledge that actually they're measuring gender identity. NRS, on the other hand, the Scottish Census Authority, are very explicit that the sex variable they're measuring is self-identified sex. But they are pretending that self-identified sex is not the same thing as gender identity. Wow. They've actually got a definitions paper where they put a definition for self-identified sex, and then next to it is a definition for gender identity. And one of them is like, whether you identify as male or female, and the other one is whether you have an internal sense of yourself as a man or a woman. And they're like pretending that these are separate concepts. Right. you're just like, what? So what happened essentially, I'll just tell the end of the story because it's a bit complicated. That during the Scottish census hearings, it became clear that NRS's introduction of the non-binary sex question had been made kind of conceptually possible by the fact that the whole thing was being framed by this guidance, which meant that NRS had essentially already reconceptualized the sex question as a gender identity question, which is how it made sense to them to then put in a non-binary sex question. And there's hilarious data in this document where they're showing questions for the sex question to trans participants, and the trans participants are interpreting the sex question as about sex. And NRS are getting really frustrated because they're like, why are you interpreting about sex? That's not what we're measuring. We're trying to give you a sneaky gender identity question, and then you're still interpreting it as being about sex. And I know we're kind of constrained by using the word sex because that's what the law says. But you need to, and they actually end up blaming the trans participants for not kind of blaming, but being frustrated with the trans participants for misinterpreting the question because the question has the word sex in it. And the trans participants are being like, this seems like a gender identity question. Are you confused? And then I was like, no, you're confused.
So trans people themselves seem to be, a lot of them, perfectly happy to acknowledge their sex and their gender identity as two separate things. But everybody's... Some. Yeah.
That's the thing, right? So I mean, it's absolutely mad. Like NRS produced this document, which is in 2018, which supports the non-binary sex question. It's an 80-page document. 20 pages of that entire document is devoted to like very, very detailed recounting of the testimony of 12 trans people, 5 of whom are non-binary, not all of whom agree with the non-binary question. So some number of trans people, less than 12, wanted a non-binary sex question and found the binary sex question made them feel bad. Therefore, we're going to change the census. That's basically what that document. Oh and not all of the trans people in that focus group of 12 people were agreed. A lot of them were like, you've conflated sex and gender identity. And NRS is like, shut up! That's not what the Scottish Trans Alliance wants you to say. Be quiet. And they say these incredible things like, this appears to be based on their prior understanding of the concept. Just like, which is the understanding that we all have. Which is the understanding that everyone has because that's what the word means. Yeah. Right? It's like, and why do you not understand we've redefined this concept? And like, why are you messing this up? It's amazing. And as soon as they start saying things like,
these poor ignorant trans people who think their gender identity is different.
Who think their gender identity is different from their sex. And then the NRS say, well, we're going to ignore those people because those people think that sex is biological. It's amazing. It's amazing.
Jane, how does such a sober organization as the ONS get captured? I mean, I can see even the police getting captured because the police were so traumatized by the Stephen Lawrence inquiry and being called institutionally racist. I can get why it would be attractive to them to look super woke and to make up all this nonsense. But how does someone who's entrusted with data gathering
No, and I mean this is why, I mean, like, the census is kind of dry, right? I get that, but I also kind of find it really fascinating for exactly that reason, right? Because it's a fundamental principle of data gathering that you know what you're measuring, right? You're going to spend £1 billion on the largest data collection exercise that this society undertakes, and you have completely, you've made this massive conceptual clusterfuck over one of the core questions, and you do not know what you're measuring, right? And Susan McBee, who's a professor in Scotland and also involved in like longitudinal studies, anyway, she went to the Scottish Parliament, and she's basically like, NRS have committed the primary sin of data collection, which is confusing what you're measuring, right? So it bothers me on a it bothers me with respect to the integrity of the data, right? But it bothers me much more on a kind of conceptual, philosophical level, which is like, how can such a large organization that is entrusted with performing this public duty get in such a conceptual mess and violate like the basic principles of what they're supposed to be doing?
Yes, and entrusted is the word. We trust them. We are trusting them to gather our data so that we can then actually apply policy to it, so that we know exactly what the population of the UK is.
And it's part of the social contract, right?
Yes.
Like, we allow, we allow ourselves to give our data to you because we trust that you are going to use this data for particular purposes, for the benefit of health services and equalities and these types, and also for the historical record, right? And not only have you not consulted the people who are the main stakeholders in the sex question, and you've not only not consulted us, we've actually had to fight tooth and nail to try and be consulted. After we found out about the guidance, they tried to do something about it in the Scottish Parliament, and the officials in the Scottish Parliament just fobbed them off, and NRS fobbed them off, even though NRS actually admitted in the Scottish Parliament that they had no idea what effect on data the 2011 guidance had and hadn't even bothered to try and look at it, right? But we couldn't do anything about it. Then Alice Sullivan and the other social scientists wrote this letter in late 2019, which was sent to all of the census authorities, being like, we are very concerned that you are corrupting the sex data. What is going on? And then it took them 6 months to get a meeting.
Wow.
And the FOIs that we've got, we FOI'd the emails between ONS and the trans rights organisations and Stonewall and stuff around that meeting. I did a thread about it on Twitter yesterday, in which Stonewall are telling ONS, we strongly advise that you take, precautions or think very carefully about how you make sure that this is not a hostile environment for the trans participants. 5 data scientists, 5 social scientists who have come to say, excuse me, why are you corrupting the sex data? And they packed that meeting out with like 15 or something representatives of the trans rights movement. And Stonewall were giving ONS explicit instructions beforehand that you must make sure that these 5 people who believe in sex and want to ask you why you've corrupted the sex data are not creating a hostile environment.
Wow.
And yesterday when Nick and Nancy were on the radio, that's the consultation. When Nancy says, ONS have consulted widely, what they mean is data users and women's groups had to write a letter to all of the census authorities. They had to get the ombudsman involved to put pressure on the census authorities about why they weren't doing anything about this. Eventually, we held a roundtable meeting, which we packed out with LGBT representatives, and then we completely fobbed you off. That's what they mean.
So let's move on to what people can do. I know that there's a legal. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
There's one last thing I need to say, right, about the guidance.
Sure.
So originally, the guidance in 2011 said that you can just self-identify. It was straight up self-identification guidance. You can just fill it out with whatever you think your gender identity is. Because of the pressure that we've been putting on ONS, that what they claimed, and I think Ian Diamond claimed this on the radio a couple of weeks ago, they claimed they were going to fall back to legal sex, which is basically people with a GRC can fill in the other sex, but you can't self-identify, right? So we thought that was settled. Then when ONS released their guidance like a week and a half ago, it says the sex on your legal/official documents. And they've included in that passport and anything else, driver's license, documents that you can change simply by request with a doctor's note, for example. So effectively what they've done is they've redefined legal sex as self-ID. And they've said, oh, no, we're asking for legal sex. But we're like, no, but passports are self-ID. They're not legal sex. Legal sex is what it says on your birth certificate. The only way to get your birth certificate changed is to have a gender recognition certificate, right? It's either what your biological sex is, or it's the 5,000 people that have a gender recognition certificate. Anybody who goes to a doctor and says they have gender dysphoria, or they need to get the sex markers on their passport changed, can do so with a doctor's note. So effectively, it's a complete scat, right? It's like, we're going to redefine legal sex as self-identified sex because we are hell-bent on the sex question being self-identified sex, and we're going to wiggle around whatever you say in order to get the result that we want. And I have no idea how they have this much power. All I know is that ONS and Stonewall and the various other trans rights organizations have a very cozy relationship. And what is going on, it makes no sense to me. You look at these documents right from 2009, the trans rights organizations go in and ONS just start writing these things down, and they're gibberish. And you're just like, they never ask any questions. They're never like, hang on a minute. It seems like this concept of gender identity is kind of overwriting sex. This is going to cause problems. Nothing. It's just like, there's something so weird about this thing. It just like eats people's brains. And then suddenly they're just like, oh yes, and we might just say this. And they start writing stuff down that's complete gibberish, and they never even notice it's gibberish. It's maddening.
Yeah, it is. And we've seen it for years, haven't we? And we've seen it with so many.
We've seen it for years, and the census authorities, because, like you say, it's a boring, nerdy thing where you think these people are supposed to be. I mean, we're talking about the chief national statistician, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, what can we do? What can we do?
Well,
yes.
I mean, I think, what can we do? Right.
Sorry, I should say before we begin, there is a legal action. Fair Play for Women are mounting a legal action. We'll put the link to the crowdfunder.
The link up. I mean, what can we do? There are several things, right? I think. I mean, and we put out a little statement last Sunday about this. At the moment, I think, given that there is a judicial review going on, we should behave ourselves, basically.
Yeah, I agree.
I know I went very like, let's go full suffragette. I was really kind of annoyed.
No, I think that's fair enough.
We did all this work, and I was just like, you're treating us with contempt, right? Yeah. Like, and at some point we have to stop being so compliant, because we've been very nice. We've produced lots of reports. We've given you lots of data. We've asked for lots of meetings. We've been extremely polite. We've used civic processes properly, and you're treating us with contempt. That said, that was before the judicial review was announced. So I think the judicial review is very, very important. I would urge everybody who is concerned about the census to give money to Fair Play for Women. I think we have an extremely strong case. Luckily, we collected a lot of the receipts.
Yes.
We have a lot of evidence.
Great.
We have a huge amount of evidence. ONS are on very, very sketchy ground. They have changed the meaning of the sex question without consulting the people who are the primary stakeholders in the sex question. And we have lots of evidence that they have basically just attempted to exclude us from the process, and have only very begrudgingly allowed us to and have ignored pretty much everything that we've said. So
let's wait for the judicial review.
So my basic idea is, let's wait until the judicial review, and then let's see where we are when the results of the JR come in.
Yeah, good thinking.
Because I don't, I feel very uncomfortable about it. I do not want to be forced. I feel like the public, like you said, there's public trust, right? And I feel like they violated it. So I'm just like, I want to be able to give you my data because I want to feel that I'm living in a society which treats me with respect and treats my data with respect. And I don't feel like that at the moment. And I'm extremely angry with our public institutions in general because essentially they've just left us to hang out to dry.
They really have.
We have had this insanely narcissistic rights movement unleashed on us, and they're too scared to stand up to them, so they're just going to leave it to us. I'm like,
yes, that's absolutely right.
Excellent work, thanks. We'll just leave it to a bunch of women who've already got quite a lot on their plate, like raising other humans.
A bunch of women, some gay guys, and a
bunch of women and some gay guys and one comedian.
And one straight man, and
one straight man. There's
about straight man who cares about women.
There's about five straight men. They're very lovely.
No. There's quite a few straight men who are being really,
and they're very lovely, and the male allies are great, and they really, really get it. But this has been the most enormous cover for like every Tom, Dick, and Harry misogynist to just come
hasn't it just?
And you've got Lord Hunt standing up in the House of Lords going, where is the Department of Health? Oh, they're scared. Where is ONS? Oh, they're scared. Where are the parliamentarians who know this is nonsense? Oh, they're scared. Oh, okay, we'll just leave it to a bunch of middle-aged women and like 5 gay guys and a comedian.
Scared to ask men what sex they are in a private census question. I mean, literally, just a M or F. All of this is just about asking people privately to tick a box.
It is exactly.
And it's not even like that data is not released into the public domain for 100 years, and it's processed in aggregates, right? It's processed at population level, right?
Yeah.
And yes, sometimes people will drill down into it. It's completely anonymized when it's processed in those ways. Nobody will know, right? It's entirely about, and the Equality Network wrote an email to NRS at some point where they were instructing NRS about why it was not acceptable for the sex question to be a legal sex question. And one of the answers they put is like, well, it will misgender trans people. And it's like, what anonymous data processed in aggregate cannot misgender anyone.
No, but
all you're talking about is the fact that person doesn't feel validated by that form.
Yeah, like every time you go to a doctor,
it's a data collection exercise.
Yeah.
Exactly. There's going to be a lot of 100 years. They're going to be thinking a lot of women had prostate cancer for some reason in the year 2020.
Right. I mean, like it's really.
But isn't it important for trans people for society or for like our lawmaking institutions to understand what the population of trans people are and what their birth sex is?
Yes, but one thing we should always say. I mean, it's something I've said since the start, since I first fucking blundered into this thing, is that we're generally not talking about trans people. We're talking about people who are who say they're trans, who have no dysphoria, who if you look at someone like Debbie Haight and Christina Harrison, they completely agree with us on all this stuff. They completely agree. The people who are making the problem are activists. Who are adopting a trans identity. This is an exercise in domination.
Right. Yeah. Which is also why, I mean, and it comes back to it very often. Things that we say this quite often. Various things that the front, the people who are pushing the trans ideological, trans right agenda are doing are not in the interests of trans people, right?
No.
It's not in the interests of trans people, for example, for the trans rights movement to be going around telling young, vulnerable trans people that everyone hates them, and they're in. Lorelei tweeted something a few weeks ago where some young trans person was in some university committee, and it was coming up to Trans Day of Remembrance, and someone had asked them to do something, so they went off and started digging around into the figures around Trans Day of Remembrance, and then they're just going, there's no epidemic of violence against trans people in Britain. I'm not actually in danger. And that person had been walking around for years thinking they had a target on their back, and they don't. And what kind of fucking rights movement goes around terrorizing the people that it is supposed to be representing? And I felt really, I kind of wanted to write to that person because it was a very honest thing. And they were like, oh, and then I checked this out, and then I discovered it was all these Brazilian prostitutes. And,
and that is honest, actually.
It was. I kind of wanted to reach out to them because it was a very intellectually honest thing. And I was like, and at the end, they're like, I'm really confused. Like, I think this is really good news for the I think this is really good news for the trans population. And then we were like, it is, but they don't want you to know it because
they don't want you to know it, and they certainly don't want you to say it.
Well, sorry, Helen, I keep cutting across.
And they don't want you to know it.
And it's the same thing with the data, right? And we're not going to get consistent data because some trans people will answer the sex question with their sex, and some trans people will answer it with their gender identity. And we've got no idea, because none of this has been honestly discussed by the Office of National Statistics, how they're going to break that down. Are they going to, if someone answers the sex question and says they're female, and then they answer the gender identity question and they say they have a trans identity, and then they say they're a trans woman, are they then going to record the fact that they're actually male? Are they going to jig the sex data back so that we will actually get the correct data? In cases where people are non-binary and they say they've got a non-binary identity, they might answer the sex question with their sex, but if they're like a non-binary mask identified person who's female, they might answer it with the other sex. Like, it's not, we don't know. There's been no testing because there's been no honesty in ONS's process about what is actually going on here. And it's in the interests of the trans population to understand what their demographics are, and that includes people's gender identity and their sex. And also, in our, from our perspective, at subpopulation levels, like, another argument that they'll make is this doesn't matter at the general population level, and that might be true, but it matters at subpopulation levels. If you're looking at young people between the age of 15 and 25 in East London, it will matter, right? Yes. And agreed. I would like to know how many young females are identifying as non-binary right now. And that would be helpful, right? Yes. Because we actually don't understand what the demographics of this phenomenon are. And it would be really useful. Like, how many trans-identified people are middle-aged males? How many trans-identified people are teenage girls? Like all of that information would be useful, right? We can't get that information from the way it's constructed at the moment.
No, that's fair.
Now, I seem to recall the gay rights movement was about trying to get homosexuality into the census so that we could be measured. Right. Wasn't there a huge battle to demand that people ask us what our sexual orientation was so that we could get proper stats?
Right. And and that's the thing. And this is also, I mean, this is a bit of a technical, nerdy point, but this is a thing that happens in the discussions in the census papers, right? Is that the trans population have a legitimate user need in good demographic data, right? Of their own population, right? And that's really important. And there's also a general public user interest for the health service, for all public institutions, for historians, for everyone. There is a public interest and an identified user need for good information on the trans population, right? But what they're doing is that the desire for validation is actually overriding the desire for good demographic data, and the census authorities, and that's not a user need, that's a respondent need. And respondent need is not actually a criteria for developing demographic instruments, right? And then the ONS will basically collude with the trans rights organizations who want the validating function of the census to override the quality of the data, and they will try to pretend that that's in the user, that's a user need. That's a need that public bodies actually will be better served by having this data corrupted, because it makes trans people feel uncomfortable. And there's no questioning around that as well. And obviously the reason why we're concerned about that is that validation desire is what is driving so much of the sex erasure that's going on in public life. And the census authorities just completely fall in line and totally collude with them and corrupt and effectively subvert the function of the census from a data collection to a validation exercise.
And the thing I find extraordinary about it is that isn't it illegal to not answer questions or to do a protest on your census? Isn't that illegal? And now they're literally telling people that they can lie on the census. You know, I mean, it blows my mind.
And that's what the guidance is for. The guidance is there. Originally, the guidance came about because in 1998, a trans activist wrote to ONS saying, "What should I put on the census?" Because irrespective of the trans rights organizations' attempt to rewrite history, because now they're claiming trans people have always been able to record their gender identity on the census, which is not true, because otherwise they wouldn't have asked for the guidance. Because the point of the guidance was to make it clear that they were not going to prosecute trans people who recorded their gender identity on the census rather than their sex. And that came from a piece of campaigning that was done by a trans activist in the late 90s and was then put on Press for Change's website. And when Press for Change put it on their website, they were like, "Way, we can answer the census." And it's very interesting because they will always represent it as truthful, right? They will say, "You were forcing us to lie on the census because our sex is a mistake," right? So we should, like, our real inner sex is... Yeah. So there's all of it's framed in that language. Yes. So now we can give a truthful answer, whereas before you were forcing us to lie. Right. Okay. And I'm like, that's an interesting use of the word truthful, right? But they're obviously now trying to rewrite history and say, well, we've always been able to answer the sex question the way we want, and we're like, well, in that case we can remove the guidance then because it doesn't have any but clearly you couldn't, because actually you know that legally and in biological reality you are not the sex that you identify as, so you know that when you write that on the census that's not actually accurate in the conventional sense of the term.
Do we know when the judicial review will be? Is that a date?
Well, apparently, we'll have to see. Fair Play for Women sent a letter of action on Friday to ONS telling them that they want them to rescind the guidance, basically, and they want the guidance, and they wanted a reply by this evening. Close of business today, so 13 minutes ago. Oh, wow. So I don't know what's happened yet. My understanding is that if we have not received a reply from ONS, or if we receive a reply from ONS that fobs us off, both of which options are quite likely given the way they've behaved, they're going to go to the High Court and they're going to apply for an expedited judicial review before the 21st. Okay. So luckily, we've actually done a lot of work on this. Like several of us, Murray Blackburn Mackenzie have done a lot of work on it. Me and Lisa Mackenzie have done a lot of work on it. Maya has. Nick's also done work. Like we've done our homework basically. So luckily, that means that we can actually get together the receipts and the evidence to bring a judicial review pretty quickly. My understanding is that Naomi Cunningham, who's very good legal feminist, is representing them. I think they've got 2 barristers. So I don't know with respect to how the High Court is going to look at this issue for expedition. We'll have to find out about that. But it needs to be done before the 21st, right? So
the moral is follow Fair Play for Women. Those of you who are allowed on Twitter, follow Fair Play for Women. At the
moment, we have some suggestions about things that can be put in the census on census night if this is not sorted out. And I personally am also going to, if the High Court, if the judicial review doesn't work out, I'm going to suggest that we engage in some acts of more theatrical insubordination, not necessarily like corrupting the census data, because I think it's quite important we don't corrupt the census data.
I agree.
But hopefully, I think we need to make it visually, demonstrably clear that we are really reaching the point at which being treated with this kind of contempt we're not going to tolerate it for much longer.
Absolutely.
We have been extremely polite up till now.
Yes, honestly.
Here's an idea to help maybe move the needle a little bit. What if I enter the Rose of Tralee?
What's
that?
Do you not know the Rose of Tralee competition? It's basically what we based the Lovely Girls competition from Father Ted on. It's basically all these unmarried virginal girls appear on stage and get asked questions about how many children they plan to have and stuff.
Oh my God.
Yeah, it's a
huge,
huge,
horrifying patriarchal right.
It's not great, but it's open in Ireland, and I think, and you know what, I think that I don't see anything in it about trans women not being allowed to join. So I think if you are Irish, try and get into the Rose of Tralee if you're a straight man like me, because I don't think anything would quicken the end of this stuff than a stage full of people who look like me, calling themselves Ashley and so on. It's great to see Small Artie back, which I'm going to use to...
Oh, yes.
I love Small Artie. Yay.
He's disappeared!
I just wanted to point out also that Artie seems to... his lamp has gone, and in its place, a beautifully decorated golden milk churn.
I was noticing it earlier. It's a very lovely thing. Is this new?
Yes.
Behind you, your ornament.
I like to change it up. Yes, it's a luxury milk thing.
It's a luxury milk churn.
And I think in all seriousness though, I think there's going to be more of these types of actions. Like the fact that the kind of gatekeeping has come down over the question of sex in things like, political representation of women and women's sports and all these type of things. I think if you are up for it, I think young men especially, because apparently you have to be under 29 to enter the Rose of Tralee. I think young men should try and do as many of these actions as possible, because
I think
the more visible it is, the better,
I definitely think that we're going to need to move to some more kind of visual direct action type.
I noticed that there was some stickering action in Dublin.
Yes, the Stanland question.
The Stanland question
has been appearing. I really think that all of that stuff is important, right? As long as we don't do anything violent and harm people, I think it's important to draw people's attention to what's happening, and it's been done in reverse. I live in Brighton, and for about 5 or 6 years, when trans ideology was really kind of, so from about 2014 to it's a lot less now. The lampposts all over Brighton were covered in stickers, like trans rights stickers, constantly. I was constantly maybe not constantly, but there were a lot of them. I would be sitting in the pub and I would look at the wall and there would be a sticker telling me that I wasn't welcome in the pub.
Right. And I was going to ask, you live in Brighton, you must be running from place to place.
For about 2 years, the post box at the end of my road had a sticker on it.
Yeah.
And what did it say? It said, "Trans happiness is real."
Oh, okay.
It's bizarre. We exist.
What a weird form of activism. This is the strangest. Have you ever seen? Can I just say, Jane? Isn't that a sign of that it's the most privileged civil rights movement of all time? Because it's not about getting jobs. It's not about, it's not about anything substantial. It's just about, another thing I noticed a while back, and I sometimes talk about this, I just love to bring it up briefly, but one of the weirdest ads I ever saw was one for trans rights. And I saw it one Christmas, and it said something like at the end, "We deserve to be loved."
Yeah.
And I thought, what? What civil rights movement has ever said that people deserve to be loved? That's an odd thing to say.
Yes. On the
guy who coined. Yeah.
No,
sorry.
After you. Sorry.
Oh, there's a guy who coined a term, luxury beliefs. That there are some beliefs that you can, if you're very privileged, you can entertain this belief, but it has a massive cost on the lower classes and the working classes and people who don't have privilege. And what bigger luxury belief is there than to insist that everyone else has to pretend they can't see what sex you are? You know, that is such a luxury belief. I always think about The Walking Dead and zombie apocalypse shows. You're not going to see a lot of trans people during the zombie apocalypse because they wouldn't survive the first day, you know?
Right. And also, right, when you're in a situation where firstly, it's a luxury belief. Secondly, it's being used by large corporations to cover over unfair exploitation practices, the continued exploitation of raw materials, the treatment of their workers, you know, and to kind of, you know,
put a rainbow on it and it's all good.
Put a rainbow on it and it's all good. And you can carry on like treating your female employees like shit, not giving them maternity leave, like all of that stuff. But it's like, look, I'm wearing a rainbow lanyard. You know, so it's not only as a privileged belief, it provides like window dressing for the continuation of various exploitative practices.
Yeah, it is cheap. Yeah,
and they are fucking exporting this all over the world. They're imposing it on the global south in places where sex-based oppression is still like smack hard in your face, like FGM. Women can't own property, child marriage, breast ironing, like, you know, in Mexico, the women are up in arms. Mexico has like an absolutely horrifying rate of sexual violence and femicide. And they're being told your sex doesn't matter, right? In the interest of a Western ideology that was developed principally by highly privileged white males in the 90s. I'm not saying that's not true of all grassroots. Like there is grassroots trans activism, right? Like you say.
But yes,
but that's grassroots trans activism is not the thing that is pushing this through civic institutions.
Yeah,
right.
Perfect.
And that was strategized in a certain kind of way by lawyers, principally. While like clothing themselves in all of this alleged anti-racist discourse that is actually racist as hell, and then imposing this on majority Black countries where they, I mean, like, and this is the thing, this gives the lie to the whole thing. Oh, we're so decolonial and blue, 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 and like sex is a Western construct and blue, blue, blue. That they get to African countries. I spoke to a Nigerian feminist recently, and I'm like, so how is intersectionality playing out in Africa or in Nigeria? Because obviously they can't tell you that you're white feminists. And she's like, oh, they just tell us we've got straight privilege and that we have to give up all our rights because of our historic oppression of lesbians. And it's just they just change. They just
is
change.
This Dee? Is this Dee?
No, this isn't Dee. No,
okay.
it's but the Nigerian feminists are beginning to organize now. They're like pretty fucking pissed off. And the Mexican feminists are organizing, and you know, I've started speaking to Japanese women. They're getting pretty pissed off about it because they have very high levels of sexual violence, and Japan is a very misogynist culture, right? And they're imposing this shit, and at the same time, they're telling us that it's part of decolonialization. And I just cannot.
But honestly, they say so much like that you know, it's just yet another one of those things. Like it's you know, the whole violence thing, isn't it? You know, like TERFs are enacting violence. I want to draw your attention to a tweet because I think this is really interesting. It's from that chap who draws the little cute dinosaur cartoons, and he published, and he's Dinoman_J. And on the 22nd, he's drawn a little cute cartoon, 2 little dinosaurs holding little guns saying, fuck TERFs. And it's had 17,000 likes so far. And lots of people like, yeah, I want this in a jumper. Now, I've reported this. And I want as many people as possible to report this, because I genuinely don't think Twitter is going to sanction this in any way, despite the fact that it's clearly inciting violence against mainly women. And I really want to see if Twitter actually does anything about it. And my guess is
maybe we could put the link in the thing. Artie, would you handle that? Would that
I'll send it to you, Artie.
Yeah,
I will send it to you.
And we're getting to the point right now, so our elected officials are drawing attention to this, and still, you know, and there was that horrifying effigy image that came from Spain,
awful.
last week, And these are the people who are lecturing us about how evil it is to other human beings, and the entire movement is based on turning us into this dehumanized boogie woman. And they don't even know. This is it's so fucking insidious, right? I mean, I was talking to Blob actually the other day, and
good old Blob.
Good old Blob.
What?
Don't say any name.
Oh no, I didn't say anything.
She was telling me, like, her kids, because she's, they're that generation, but they don't even really know what TERFs are. It's like they don't know what we believe, right? They just think we hate. They just think we hate gender non-conforming people. Like the number of these little kids that come up to me and they're just like, Prince would hate you, and I'm like, I always kind of want to be like, I really want you to bring him back from the grave and then accuse him of genital fetishism and see how that goes.
Yes, let's bring him back so we can ask him.
One thing about Prince is he's absolutely clear about who a woman was. He never had any doubts about that.
I really think that if you that's not going to fly. That's not going to fly. Right? But they're literally operating at that level. They literally do not understand that the rights movement is about sex erasure, right? And that's what we're objecting to, and that we're objecting to the medicalization of gender nonconformity. Like, they think we're just upset about there being gender nonconforming kids. I mean, they really do. But
again, it's that excellent propaganda, isn't it? It's worked very well. There's no coincidence that this is a 4-letter word that you can hurl at women, that you can use it to just talk about any woman that you don't like is a TERF, and therefore TERFs are women you don't like, and it's circular. It's worked. It's the same as bitch. We've seen it all before.
Absolutely, and it exactly. It sounds like the structure of the word is very hard. It's very short. It's like
it works brilliantly.
It's really, and then they're like, it's just descriptive.
I've got something.
No, it's not. You could say that about any slur. They're usually just descriptions.
Right. No, exactly. Right. And yeah.
Sorry. But we're coming up to an hour and a half, which is probably our longest show yet.
Well, no, that's because you got me on, and you know what?
Yes, this is true.
Like, this is the problem.
But I just wanted to kind of end it by reading a quote that Sam Vimes on Twitter found the other day, and I think you'll all love it. When you talk about these kids, you can understand that the kids are too influenced by the internet and everything that comes across their point of view, and all these mimetic phrases, however you would say that. But what I've always found more confusing is why people like John Ronson fall for it. And this quote, I think, it really nails it. It's I'm not sure who it is. Someone Elul is mentioned, but let me read this to you. A related point central in Elul's thesis is that modern propaganda, which I take to be this current propaganda against feminism, cannot work without, quote, education. He thus reverses the widespread notion that education is the best prophylactic against propaganda. On the contrary, he says, education, or what usually goes by that word in the modern world, is the absolute prerequisite for propaganda. In fact, education is largely identical with what Elul calls pre-propaganda, the conditioning of minds with vast amounts of incoherent information already dispensed for ulterior purposes and posing as facts and as education. You notice the way people always say, educate yourself.
Educate yourself.
Yeah.
Elul follows through by designating intellectuals, and John Ronson, this is for you, as virtually the most vulnerable of all to modern propaganda for 3 reasons. 1, they absorb the largest amount of second-hand, unverifiable information. 2, they feel a compelling need to have an opinion on every important question of our time, and thus easily succumb to opinions offered to them by propaganda on all such indigestible pieces of information. And 3, they consider themselves capable of judging for themselves. They literally need propaganda. Isn't that amazing? That was written before we were born. Can you believe that?
Yes,
it's almost like
I can.
It should be
very interesting.
It should be in Twitter's terms and conditions. It should be there so people could go, oh, what am I signing up for? Oh yeah, okay, I'm signing up to be half smart.
There's also that famous Orwell quote as well. Some ideas are so stupid that only intellectuals would believe them.
Yes. Yeah. That's great. Listen, I gotta get on with my day, I'm afraid. But
I'll stop talking.
Jane, that was really, really great. Thank you. Please,
thank you for having me.
Anytime, and please go to Fair Play for Women. We'll provide links, but donate to their crowdfunder for the Judicial Review. Let's try and make sure that people in 100 years aren't completely confused by the data they find from 2021.
Yes.
Yeah. Thanks,
something
everyone.
Very strange happened.
Yes, exactly. I believe it was something to do with the man going on a female dating app. I will see you, everybody. I'll see you guys next week. Jane, we'll see you in a few weeks or months, whenever you would like to come back and
I'm always happy to
natter with us. And thank you for joining us, everyone.
Cheers. Bye, guys.
Bye, everyone.